Hey folks, it's Bear Gardener, and it's time to take a look at the new cards that are releasing with United Front. So, the latest mini expansion from Cards is about to land, and we're going to take a look at the cards that are coming out with it as we go through spoiler season. As always, I am a Kards Content Creator, member of the Kards Contributor Program. I should also say for declaration I am a Cards internal tester, but that's not relevant to this particular piece beyond the fact that I've seen other versions of these cards in the past that I can't talk about. I'm not currently a competitive player, but I do enjoy the game. I stream regularly, you can see all my links down below. As always, if you enjoyed the content, please do think about dropping a like, subscribe, and supporting the channel if you're able to, because that makes all the difference. Anyway, so the deal is that we're going to see a expansion, and we're going to see 24 new cards. And I'm going to break them all down now that we've released different ones in spoiler season. So we're going to go through all 24 cards, nation by nation. This is a very exciting expansion for lots of different reasons, but I think one of the coolest things for me about this expansion is it focuses exclusively on the minor nations. So we're not seeing any main nation cards in this expansion, we are instead seeing 6 brand new cards coming in for each minor nation, which means that the focus shifts to how those minor nations fit in with other decks and augment them, and I always think that's really cool to see, because seeing the minor nations take a step up is always interesting. As ever, my breakdown will be pretty much a quick read through the cards and then explaining my thoughts on them and how I feel about the design, probably the art because I inevitably end up commenting on it. If you have thoughts, please drop them in the comments below. You can also, of course, join my Discord or reach out to me through various social media channels. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump into the cards. So, we're going to go alphabetically, and that means that we start with Finland, also the home of 1939. The company that makes cards, and we're going to start with a new order for Finland. So this is Dark Deeds, 1 cost standard order, pretty simple. Add a sissy to your support line, draw a card, discard it at the end of your next turn. So on the face of this of course is really good value, because this is 1 cost to drop a unit, which is the sissy, which is a 1/1, but anytime it does damage to a unit, that unit is destroyed. So Sissy, kind of, if you're a Magic the Gathering player, has Death Touch. It should be appearing just down there. And of course you get to draw a card. So on the face of it, this is incredible value for 1 cost. However, of course, the downside of this is that you have to discard that card at the end of your next turn if you don't use it. So if you draw something you can't use, you're not able to keep it. However, let's be honest, that's a manageable downside to me. Giving a functional draw is always good. Sissy has started to see more support. We've seen some cards now that let you buff and augment your Sissy units, which is pretty cool. And this would obviously sort of combo into that idea as well. How much we're going to see that is a different question. Again, the Allied Nation deal is that you can only run 12 cards, which means that if you're kind of diving into something like this, which almost becomes an archetype, you've only got 12 cards to dive into it, unless you have a main nation that does something similar. However, I'm sure some people will play around with this. Also, like, I love the art in this card. It's very dark, very brooding. It's pretty cool. I like this as just a good, really solid value 1 cost card with a drawback that you can play around. I certainly think we're going to see some people experiment with it. How long it kind of hits and how much it sticks in the meta, that's a different question. I guess we'll find out, but it's definitely an interesting tool to add to the Finnish arsenal. Next up, we have another Finland order. This one is a limited card. 2 cost, Molotov Cocktail. Molotov Cocktail deals 2 damage, and the enemy discards a card, but it has discard at the end of your turn. So we're starting to see a theme here. So again, this is a really good value card. 2 damage and cause your enemy to discard for 2 credits is really good value. Really, really strong value. But of course, if you don't make use of it, you lose it. So this is, again, a use it or lose it kind of Finland feel. And that's an interesting direction to take things. I'm never against seeing some high risk, high reward, and obviously you can expect that people will find ways to manage that. Spoilers, there might be some included in the Finland set. But I like this. I think it's a solid, kind of balanced piece of damage. It is really good. It is going to lean into discard, which is always going to be a little bit controversial. There are people, and I understand it, who really don't like discard as an archetype. Getting something like this that's going to lean into discard may polarize things. But on the whole, I just think it's a really useful tool, and I'm kind of interested to see how this theme of discard if you don't use it ends up working. So it's pretty exciting. It's obviously quite good value. The art, by the way, of the Molotov cocktail. Again, there's some great art in this expansion. I've enjoyed it. But I like this. I think it's going to be interesting. I certainly think we'll see people experiment with it, and it certainly helps Finland kind of float into a specific direction. I've just noticed a little curly arrow on the card. I don't know whether that's going to make the final cut, but if it does, it's an interesting one to have. But yeah, this is Molotov Cocktail, and we'll see how it goes. Could be really good value, certainly a tool I think people are going to experiment with in probably Germany, Finland discard decks, but we shall see. Next, we have yet another Finland order. This one is Prolonged Siege. It is a 5-credit order and is a special card. And Prolonged Siege allows you to draw 4 cards, and you discard them at the end of your next turn. So this is, again, really big into this same theme. So this is giving you incredibly good value draw, but with the downside that it's use it or lose it. There's not a lot really to say about this other than it could be incredibly strong as a draw tool. 5 cost to draw 4 cards is really decent value, especially if your game goes long enough. I mean, if you're playing this on a dead turn 5 or a turn 6 where you don't have anything good, your next turn you should, in theory, have enough credits to play this. Play out the cards that you pull from this, I should say. And again, the artwork, kind of dark, grim. I'm wondering how much of this is from the same artist. But yeah, I'm quite excited by this as an archetype for Finland, and clearly this is a focused expansion, and that's always a good sign. They've gone with the theme, which is this use it or lose it methodology. We'll see how it goes. I certainly think this is probably worthy of inclusion if you're looking, especially if you're playing Finland to ally a nation that struggles for draw. This is one good way of doing it, especially if that nation is able to run enough kind of reasonably priced cards that you have a good way of doing it. Of course, you can't. Well, you can, but you're probably not going to run this in a very top-heavy deck because you don't want to run the risk of drawing 4 cards that you can't possibly afford to play. So this is definitely going to lean to be, I would have thought, draw-in faster, low-curve decks. But I'm certainly interested to see how it gets used, and I think it's, again, really interesting design. Let's see what else is in this package. Okay, so this is Finnish, boys. This is a unit for Finland. It is a special. It's a 3-cost, 1-op cost guard, and it's 2/7, so it's good guard stats. And it has the game text, your cards cannot be discarded. Clearly, this is absolutely landing as the big lockdown or payoff for this archetype, because obviously as long as this is on the board, you can't have your cards discarded, which means that you're in a great position to make use of the cards that have discard them if you don't use them. So obviously this is kind of a payoff. I've got to be honest, I think it's going to depend on how people choose to use those draws. As I say, if you're doing it in a much more low curve deck where you're kind of really expecting to just play out the cards the next turn anyway, the question is in a 12 slot ally, have you really got the room to run a couple of these? Are they going to be good enough value? That said, they are pretty difficult to remove. I mean, obviously you can get them with anything that targets or punts off of attack value, but they've got good solid body on them. It is a good guard, even outside of its text. On the whole, I think this is quite a strong card if the archetype is one that you want more sustain in. As I say, I think the question becomes, is that the way that you go, or do you lean in the direction of trying to fire off these cards much, much faster and not worrying so much about needing to get round the downside? But we shall see what people do, and I think that's kind of interesting that you can use it in two different ways. And again, we're definitely locking into a theme with Finland here, and that, I think, is always positive for an allied nation, giving people a pointer of the direction that they can take these cards. Next up for Finland, another unit. This is Infantry Regiment 36. So this is another 3-cost, 1-op cost unit. This one is a 4-3 standard card, and it has Blitz and Shock. In addition, it has Deployment. Draw a card, discard it at the end of your next turn, which of course we're used to by now in this expansion for Finland, and is definitely the direction it's leaning in. So this is interesting because this is a very strong card. Infantry Regiment 36. Shock is a potent mechanic. With Blitz, that means that on turn 4 you can trade this basically for free into anything that's threatening you, which is good value. 4 will trade into a lot of things really well, and of course Shock, if you don't understand the keyword, means that the first time a unit attacks, it does not take any retaliatory damage. It takes no damage from its opponent. No matter what your opponent has, this could just swing into a 10-4 and would take no damage, and the 10-4 would be destroyed. But you lose Shock the first time you use Shock, so again, it will go away at the time. But actually, as a 3-drop, that gives you sort of, this is really a turn 4 drop, but as a turn 4 drop with Blitz, I actually think this is a very good card. It's quite utilitarian, it's very mid-range, because it gives you a really strong trade, and I'm interested to see how many people do this, and of course the draw, conditional though it may be, because you've got to use it next turn, if again you're playing a tempo deck where you want to take advantage of these draws as they come out in the next turn, if your deck's got a curve that fits that, this becomes really good. I mean, if this just draws itself, then next turn you can throw it down and use it and still have a credit spare. So I think it's important not to underestimate the strength that this could have if used well. The art, again, is on theme, and again, the card is on theme. We're definitely seeing a clear direction of travel for Finland, and I think it's a really interesting one. Last, but by no means least, we come to the final Finland card, which is an aircraft. And this is the MEBF 109G FI, or the MEBF 109G Finland. Obviously, we've got the F-109s have been in the game before. This is a 3-cost, 2-op cost, 3-4 fighter, and has, when the unit attacks the enemy HQ, draw a card from the enemy deck, discard it at the end of turn. This is a limited card, and a very strong card. The op cost is really important here because this thing can be incredibly annoying. The fact that this is effectively stealing, so the key here is this is not copying a card from your enemy's deck, this is taking a card from your enemy, letting you either use it or just discard it. So this fits a discard archetype in a very aggressive way. It's a good body. Its big drawback, notwithstanding the discard at the end of turn, because, you know, I mean, discard at the end of turn does mean that you kind of need to hope that you're not drawing a card you can't use, but honestly, if you're using this, how much you actually want to use the card you take from the enemy is questionable. I think this is more likely to be seen in decks that are just looking to discard the opposition's deck, and this does a very good job of that, because what this is going to do is allow you to grab the card from their deck and then just pitch it away, and that's 3 of these cards if you can get them to go off. The op cost is a little bit restrictive, but I have a suspicion this is going to see some play when people start to try and push discard. And I have a feeling there are some people who are going to really, really not like the way that this might fit into a discard toolbox. But at the same time, I actually think it fits the direction of travel, which is interesting for Finland, and gives a more potent punch that kind of... it synergizes better with actually discarding rather than drawing. So that's what we've seen from Finland, which is this mixture of high-risk draw for yourself, use it or lose it, and this discard mechanic support. 6 cards that I think look quite interesting. So on the whole, I think pretty interesting. So Finland has seen like 6 cards with a very clear theme. These cards obviously are all synergistic with each other. These cards are obviously all quite strong. I think this is a very good package for specific use. As I say, I think that specific use varies. There is obviously the support for discard, which I think will leap out to a lot of people, particularly veterans very quickly who've seen discarding cards before, will realise that this does allow push towards more discard. I've seen people play around more recently with discard-based decks, but obviously there's a limited pool of cards that can be used in that. This expands that pool quite substantially. But also this high-tempo draw and use, like use it or lose it method, gives Finland a use in a very different kind of deck. We've seen Finland as very good value cards in draft. We've seen Finland used lightly in support of some Lotta Svard-based Heinz decks or fast tank decks. But this puts Finland in a position to actually play high-tempo mid-range decks, getting draw without having to rely, like classically, the classic mid-range deck, US Frontline, has always relied on cards that have, units rather, or cards that have deployment effects that draw for you, like the Sherman, often conditional. These are unconditional draws in the sense that you get them, but conditional in the sense that you have to make sure that you use them. So I think that's an interesting direction of travel as well for Finland. Overall, what I do like about this, and what I think is interesting, is to see a strong synergistic package of 6 cards designed to be tight and not bitty. And that's always a good sign. So, great sign for Finland. Now we get to move on to the next nation, which of course will be France. So the first French card is the Somua S35 tank. So this is a 3-cost, 1-op cost 3/4 tank with heavy armour. Has heavy armour 1, and it's a special card, and it says the first unit you deploy each turn gets +1/+1 and -1 operation cost. This is a very strong effect. This is a very powerful tempo tool. So this card will allow you to get a lot of value. If you're dropping cards the following turn that only have 1-op cost, they're getting +1/+1 and operating for free. So if they've got Blitz, this becomes very, very effective. Now we've already seen France get some more aggressive tools. France has certainly, this would fit very well with the French, I think it's the 51E, the 51st Regiment, which has the option of either coming down as a guard or coming down with Blitz, but it is 1-op cost. This would give it +1/+1 and take it to op cost 0 with Blitz. That's a particularly potent drop that you could follow this up on. So this is also something that you're going to have to answer, because you don't want this to be spiraling value, and that's what makes this a strong special card for me, and quite an exciting one to see. I wonder, is this going to tell us what direction France is going in? Maybe it is. Maybe we're finally seeing cards to support an archetype that I was talking about a while ago, with seeing some more France kind of mid-rangey tools, or at least pseudo-aggressive tools with good stats. We'll have to find out, but I will say that this is definitely not a card to underestimate. It's very good value, it has a good body, and it is definitely strong in the way that it augments. If you don't do something about it, it could spiral on you. Anyway, let's see what else we've got to support the French forces. Okay, so next up we have a new order for France. First of all, I have to say I love the artwork on this is just fantastic. This is very cool kind of sketch level artwork. But anyway, this is Escort plan. Escort plan is really interesting. It's a one-cost standard order, and it says target unit moves into the front line if possible. Give it ambush if this is the first order this turn. So let's break this down a little. So we've seen the first half of what this card does tried in France before. It's out there. There is a card called Chasing Shadows, which is a 0-cost order. That is a limited order that allows you to move a target unit to the front line if possible. And we have the Cuirassiers, who allow you to, when they deploy, you can move a unit, yours or an opponent's, to the front line. Again, in these cases, this is target unit. You do not have to target your own unit. Now, in the case of Escort, and of course you do not want to target your enemy's unit if this is the first order you're giving, because you don't want to give it ambush, and that's the teeth of this card for me. Ambush is a much undervalued keyword that I've had some fun playing around with and exploiting in decks, as have some other top players, and in particular there are some very cool videos out there in which my friend J-King7 had a lot of fun with finding a way to use ambush to make life difficult for their opponents. This card, if it gives a good unit ambush, could be incredible value for one, and it is a standard. I actually think this is quite a strong card, which will probably see quite a chunk of thought about whether you want to include it, and it fits into the concept of creating a much more aggressive unit-based France support package, and I like that. I think that's very cool. It could be used in combination with all sorts of different things. You could use it in combination with the US and things like Bocage Warfare, which we've seen already, which is an interesting hybrid in which you're going to be able to give a unit bonuses if it moves to the front line, proc it moving to the front line with this, and in addition to giving it the bonuses, give it ambush. You could use it with British units and put guards, big guards in the front line relatively inexpensively, bypassing operation cost on heavier units if you've got 2 or 3 operation cost units. This is a versatile card that I think will get played around with. I personally am looking forward to playing around with it. But yeah, I think we're going to see some experimentation with this. It might end up being really quite strong if it finds the right fit, because honestly, the value of ambush, if you can put it on the right unit, could be huge. But yeah, very exciting card, and again, seems to be leaning to quite an aggressive French theme. Right, so this is Saar Offensive. This is a French order, and it costs 6 credits. It is a limited card, but at 6 credits it's very expensive. Really quite cool misty artwork, and the text. Deal 7 damage to a target unit. Add Cross of Lorraine to hand if this is the first order given this turn. So, like the previous order, this has a rider, and this seems to be something that we've seen. As we saw with Finland, there are riders on their new cards, and there is a rider on some of these new French cards, which is you want it to be the first thing you do in a turn. In this case, if this is the first order you play in a turn, not only you get to deal 7 damage to a target unit, I'm so glad it's a unit, you also get to add Cross of Lorraine to hand. Now, Cross of Lorraine, for those who don't know, because it doesn't see a lot of play, is a 9-cost French order, and it deals 3 damage to an enemy, but it costs 1 less for every card in the enemy hand. In the past, it was designed mostly to be used on top of Resistance, which filled your enemy's hand with Overdraw. In this case, I think if you time this right, it gives you 3 points of damage that you could target at HQ. On the whole, though, it's not an overwhelmingly strong thing to add to hand because it's very situational. But Saar Offensive alone, like 6 cost for 7 damage, is very, very strong. That is a lot of damage to a unit for 6 cost on a limited card. Whether or not you proc the second half of this is an entirely different question, but this could give you the ability to remove some absolutely huge threats really quite efficiently. So again, I'm not going to leap too hard into where I think this will see play, but I do think it's interesting. On the whole, I don't necessarily think it's the strongest of the cards we've seen from France yet, mainly because it's whether you can find a way to make Cross of Lorraine work for you, and that at the moment would involve some kind of use of something like Phony War. I mean, I suppose you could use this in Mill. It gives you 7 points of damage, and then a card that procs really heavy because it's basically going to be dirt cheap if your opponent's got a full hand. You could basically get another 3 damage for free in a deck that already wants to mill down your opponent's thing. But finding spare slots in that archetype is hard, and I don't know whether the juice is actually going to be worth the squeeze in this, but we will find out. But I think this is another card that can be used multiple ways, and I do think it is worth being mindful of whether people find ways to abuse this in decks that are unfun. But we'll find out. On the whole, I think it's interesting design, but the jury's still out for me on this card as to whether I like this design or not. The rest of the front stuff I've enjoyed the design of, this I'm less sure of. Okay, this is the 5th Cuirassiers. It's a new special French card, and on the face of it, you would probably be forgiven for wondering why on earth is this a special, because this is a 2-cost, 1-op cost, 2/3 blitz unit. It's infantry, so far, it's alright, but it's not amazing. But it has deployment. If this is the first unit you deploy this turn, add an 18th regiment to hand. Now, the 18th, which is appearing down here, and we'll talk about in a moment in more detail, is a 3-cost, 3-op cost, 4/4 guard, which says if this is the only unit you deployed this turn, at the end of the turn, set its operation cost to 0. Right. So, the thing here is that this leads to the possibility that on turn 2, in an ideal world, you drop your... turn 3, ideally, you drop your Cuirassier and blitz it forward. If it's the first unit you've deployed, you then get to, next turn, play an 18th regiment down, and at the end of the turn its op cost will go to 0, and you still have a spare credit. So in theory, this is 2 cards for 1, both of which are a bit situational. Obviously, the 18th regiment is quite situational because you are limiting yourself to not being able to deploy another card. Of course, lest we forget that that spare 1 credit fits rather well with Escort plan. So, hypothetically, on turn 3, you drop your Cuirassier, push them to the front line, adding 18th Regiment. Your opponent has to deal with them or trade them out and may not be able to take the front line, in which case, next turn, you are able to play out an 18th Regiment, then spend 1 credit on Escort plan to move the 18th Regiment to the front line and give it ambush, at which point, suddenly, this card has really strong value. Now, all of this is the key to here, and you know where I'm going to go with this, is it's a lot of hoops to jump, but it's a lot of hoops to jump that end up with a very potent effect. So it's worth keeping an eye on. This card, used well, has really good value. I mean, even if you can't use the spare credit to do something really cool like that, you're still getting, effectively, 6-7 worth of stats into your hand. And you're paying a total of 5 credits for them, notwithstanding operation cost, and a total of 6 credits, including operation cost if you use them right. This is an interesting card, and it does give France a sort of pseudo-mini snowball, which I think is really interesting. It does, again, it plays into the more aggressive theme, which we're starting to see with France. But I think this is a card to keep an eye on. I certainly think some people are going to do and try and do some really interesting stuff with this card. And as I say, I love the artwork. But anyway, moving on. It would be criminal if the next card I talked about wasn't the 18th Regiment, because we've literally just talked about it with regards to the 5th Cuirassiers, which of course will be appearing down below so that we have context. 3 cost, 3 op cost, 4 full guard, sets its own operation cost to 0 if it's the only unit you deployed, and it's a limited card. Outside of its use with the Cuirassier, of course, this is a card that might well be considered good value in the 3 op cost, or throp, if you prefer, archetype that we've seen for the US and France. So once again, we're seeing versatility in the way that you can use French cards. Now, we saw this a while ago, and I called it out when we saw the design of it, when we first started to see French cards that were clearly designed to be kind of multifunctional rather than hyper-specific, or at least variable enough, like the 51st Regiment, that you could do different things with them, and I wondered if this was something we were going to explore further in France, and I'm excited that we are, because I think it's a really interesting thing to throw into an allied nation, because there's 2 different ways you can access this card. You're probably not including this in the same deck as the Cuirassiers as a card in and of itself. This is just a bonus you get for your Cuirassier. I mean, you might be, because it is quite good, but it's stronger, obviously, in Throp, because its operation cost is high enough that it can proc, for example, the draw for having 3 op cost that you can get from various cards. There are various things that will trigger if you deploy a 3 op cost card in Throp, which this would then do, and then at the end of the turn it handily sets its operation cost to 0, saving you the need to find a way to do so. So it's an interesting include there. Whether it'll make it into that deck's a bit more debatable, but it is interesting to see a tool that could be used there being added to something that's already been explored. But what I think is much more interesting about this is the fact that it's also added as a rider on another card, and that's kind of cool because it gives France more versatility, and I think France as a versatile ally not only is interesting, but makes a lot of thematic sense in the adaptability that the French forces needed during the conflict. But anyway, I'm not going to dig too far into thematics. Again, I'm going to nod out the fact that I like that this particular style of artwork's been chosen for France. It is quite iconic if you look into the kind of the art of the period and reflective art on French warfare. Art like this you will find it, and I do think it's quite cool. Just a guy standing there with the colours, really funky to me. But yeah, I think it's an interesting card, but I think it's going to be even more interesting to see how it gets used. That does, of course, leave us one more France card to go and have a look at. So this is the last France card, and I think one that is going to be interesting to see how people feel, because this is a very special little kid. So this is the 13 Dragon, or the 13th Dragoons. Now, this card comes with the really interesting stats of 0 cost, 0 op cost Blitz. So this is a 1/2 infantry that you can play for free, use with Blitz on the turn it's deployed, and is a standard card. Kinda cracked, needs something surely to temper it, right? And it does have something to temper it. It has a very interesting something to temper it, because this card specifically says it cannot be deployed if you have deployed a unit this turn. You can play as many orders as you like, but if you have deployed a unit, this cannot be played out of your hand. So this has to be the first unit that you play, which, of course, works against some other stuff. It's interesting, though, because this is a very, very strong early tool. And stronger still because, unlike the kind of 1 cost, so, I mean, suppose by comparison, you look at the 15th Cavalry from Japan, which is the 2/1 Blitz, that is 1 cost, 0 op cost, and is a much more aggressive card. This is less aggressive. This has a much better trading set of stats, because this says to that card, you can play it, but you're going to have to just trade it out. And we're faster than you are. And that's really interesting to me. This is a very, very aggressive early play for a French deck. And I think that's really cool. But it's also a versatile tool later in the game because it gives you a free unit that can do something and maybe even benefit from orders, as long as it is the first unit you play. But obviously you can never play more than one of them, which is really good. You can't just have a handful of these on turn 1 and play them, because it cannot be deployed if you deployed a unit, and of course it's a unit. I think this is really interesting design. I think we'll have to keep an eye on it, because it is hyper aggressive, but it's definitely interesting and fits, again, the more kind of forward pressing feel that we're getting to the new French cards. Personally, I really like this card. I think it's very, very cool, and might just give people more of a chance to try around with US-France Frontline, which I've played a bit with the cards that we'd previously seen that fit into that archetype, and I think this fits in really well too. But that's France. Time to move on. Let's summarise. Okay, so France in United Front. Versatility and aggression. Really the way to put it. This is they've definitely, again, just like Finland, very tight theming, very specific focus on the way that they want these cards to kind of fit together and play. Interesting limitations. This first order played can only be deployed if you haven't deployed a unit, only gets its effect if it's the first. This sort of stuff makes for more thought-provoking turns, and I've been a big advocate of this since I joined the game. One of the things that gets me interested in any game, especially card games, is when I have to consider my turn under a time limit. These cards require more thought than a straightforward play, and that's a good thing in my opinion. They also support a more mid-range or tempo style of play, and I also think that's a good thing because that's something that has been absent from cards for a while. We've seen an awful lot of heavy ramp or big late game or pure aggro, but we haven't really seen much in the way of mid-range. Is this going to be enough to put mid-range back on the map? I don't know, but I love the fact that we're trying, and I love the way that we're doing it. Anyway, that's me on France. I'm quite excited. I'm certainly looking forward to playing some France ally decks. But we need to move on, and it's time to head, actually not that far away in European terms. We're off to Italy. Okay, so we have arrived at the boot. We are in the Southern Peninsula, we are in Italy, and we get to see Air Escort. 2-cost order. It's a limited order, obviously. You can see it on the screen, but I'll try to read this out in case you're like listening to this in your commute or doing something else. Air Escort says, trigger non-targeting deployment effects on friendly orders on the battlefield. Okay, so we sort of need to unpack that because it's quite a lot. Because it takes a minute to realise what this can actually do. When you play this order, it will trigger each and every non-targeting deployment effect on a friendly unit on your battlefield. All of them for 2. Gets you a second trigger of a conditional draw, of a stat boost for deployment, as long as the prerequisites are met, as long as you're not targeting anything, as long as it is a non-targeting, as in you don't have to target unit or target enemy, this will proc that effect. Now, that could be massive if you find the right effects to trigger it with, and I wonder, is that going to be something that is going to be part of the theme of this package, or is this just kind of an order that pushes Italy into a position whereby it can help out decks that really want their non-targeting deployment effects to go off more than once? Guess we'll find out by digging further into the cards. Right, time for another order. This is Regia Aeronautica. Regia Aeronautica is a 5-cost Italian special order, and it says deal damage to each enemy equal to friendly air units. Yes, I did read that right. If you have 5 air units on the board, This will deal 5 points of damage to every single enemy. Note enemy, not enemy unit. It hits HQ too. This is a very strong card in any air deck. This is a very, very potent card. It obviously is going to slot very heavily into a British-focused air deck, because clearly Britair has already been a thing, and the switching Italy as an ally if you can find anything else to support it. Of course, if there isn't anything to support it, it becomes a bit more of a struggle, because realistically there are some good allies for Britair. But if there's a bit more in this package, might be a thing, certainly it's potent. But also this could go into a Japan burn deck that has air units that it wants to deploy. It could combine with anything that wants to put considerable air units on the board and can do a lot of damage, because it can board clear and target HQ. Honestly, this card could end up being utterly cracked. It is 5 credits, but played at the right time, it's also devastating. So keep an eye on this. Could be very, very prevalent. You may see a lot of it. Right, next card for Italy is the 125th La Spezia. Now, first of all, I just call out to some really cool artwork, but let's look at this. La Spezia is a standard card. It is a 4-cost, 1-op cost, 2/7 guard, so it's already quite good stats. And has deployment. Draw a card if you control an air unit. So now we're starting to see. Now we're starting to see that we might be seeing at least part of Italy's theme in this being support for air. Now that's interesting. That's very interesting, because air is polarizing. Air decks do polarize people. I personally, and I will openly declare it while we're talking about this, and I'll declare it a bit more when we're summarizing at the end, I am a Britair main player a lot of the time. I play a lot of air decks because I enjoy the way that they work. This is an interesting card. I don't know. I don't know if it's good enough. In 12 slots, it really is going to depend what else is available, because while deployment, draw a card if you control an air unit, is nice, the big main air nation of the game really isn't that worried about draw. So this might be a card that just ends up kind of sitting in the background and just being quite a nice guard unit. If you happen to have an air unit, you get the thing. I don't know. I'm not set on fire by this card, but it is interesting. But I am now fascinated to take you through the rest of Italy's cards. Okie doke, so next Italy card is an aircraft, which is not a shock given what we've seen already. This is the Breda BA-65. It's a very cool looking aircraft in desert camo. This is a 4-cost, 2-op cost, 3/3 bomber. It's a limited card, and it has deployment. Deal 1 damage to each enemy. Now, this is a contextually interesting card because Regia Aeronautica exists. If you've got Breda, if you had the Breda on board when you play Regia Aeronautica, Italians, please forgive me, I should do better. You will find that this triggers again because it's non-targeted. Just a thing. This is a decent bomber. It is quite high op cost, but 3/3 is decent stats for a bomber. 3 damage off a bomber is not bad. And obviously, key point, it's a bomber, and that's something air likes, because air just wants to go past your guards, hit HQ, burn you down, and win the game. I honestly think this is quite a strong card. It is slow, but on the other hand, the deployment effect is really strong too. So definitely seeing Italy lean in an aerial direction and bring some very interesting tools to think about if you're building an air deck. Speaking of interesting cards to think about if you're building an air deck, I give you the Macchi C200. I will say I'm very excited that this card has arrived because this is an Italian aircraft. I like Italian aircraft of the World War II era. I think they look cool. I think their designs and functions were fascinating, and I've been looking forward to seeing this land in the game for a while. And I'm certainly not disappointed in the way they've chosen to use this card. So this is a standard card. It is a 2 credit, 1 op cost, 2/2 fighter. But it says deployment. You get +1/+1 for each other friendly air unit. So you drop this and you've got 3 air units in your backline. This is a 5/5. And it's a standard card. And then... if you play Regia Aeronautica, it gets +4/+4 all over again and becomes a 9/9. It's a non-targeted deployment effect. This is very synergistic with the cards we've already seen and has the potential to snowball into an incredibly dangerous unit that it's hard to deal with. I love it. I think it is an incredibly cool piece of design. I think it is really interesting, and I think it is going to put Italy in a position to be very competitive with the cards we've seen so far as an ally for any air deck. Genuinely, this thing could become a menace. But anyway, that's just my view at the moment, but I do love it, and I do think it's very cool to see this card in, and I think it's a very interesting and potentially very potent effect that is another really strong must-answer card, and it's certainly strong given that it's a standard. Okay, it's time to wrap up the Italy units with the Wolves of Tuscany. 2 cost, 1 op cost, infantry, it's 1/5 and it has blitz. It is a special, and it's a special because it has the following text. While this unit is in the front line, your air units have +2 attack. This is Blitzkrieg with a body for air. I'll say that again. This is Blitzkrieg with a body for air. This card is potentially terrifying. If you've got 3 bombers, let's just go with Swordfish. If you've got Brit Main sat in your backline and you've got a couple of buffs on them, so let's assume they've got you've got a 2 attack, a 3 attack and a 1 attack bomber sat in the backline, and then you drop this and push it forward, suddenly you get 6 points more attack, all of which can go straight to HQ. As I say, it doesn't give you the 0 op cost, thank the Lord, but it has a good enough body that your opponent's going to have to trade hard to get rid of it. Also, let us not forget that you can drop this between your aircraft, play Cass to turn it into a 2/6, then push it to the front line and make it even harder to deal with. This card could be a key card in Brit Italy Air. I personally think, at least for a while, it will be. I honestly think this card might be a little bit too good. We're going to have to wait and see, but it is very strong. I will say I'm also not the world's biggest fan of this particular choice of artwork. The dogs in this card, they are so thoroughly terrifying. That is a very scary looking dog. But anyway, the Wolves of Tuscany are a really strong card. And on that note, let's go talk about Italy. So, Italy in United Front. Again, clearly we're seeing a focus. In this case, it's very, very supportive of air decks and has thrown in some incredibly strong tools. I'm really interested to see just how hard these tools hit, because this does have the potential to build some very, very scary air decks. And not just Britair. There are other nations that run aerial units. Germany's got some decent air units. Japan, of course, has a few. Obviously, Britain is going to be the main choice because of access to things like CAS and the recently nerfed support card, whose name I completely forget. Anyway, it's probably going to appear on the screen while we're talking about it. Sea Embargo, there we go. But realistically, this is certainly a very appealing air ally with some very strong cards. possibly a bit too strong, and this is coming from someone who does like maining air decks. I certainly will be throwing together a version of Breda that runs Bitterly Ally. Certainly don't be surprised if you see some Brittly Air kicking around. Hey, there you go, Brittly Air. I've said it now, and it'll probably end up being said a lot. Anyway, really interesting, and again, I approve. The one thing I definitely, again, do approve of is the fact that we've got another strong theme, so it's very apparent to people, especially newer players, how these cards kind of fit together and what they can do, while at the same time there being some edge cases where you can do some really interesting other stuff with it. Anywho, we've still got one more nation to go, which means we get to go and spend some time in Poland. Okay, Frontal Defense. The first card for Poland is a 1-cost limited order, and it says, give a friendly unit. At the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all units. Now this is interesting, because this is all units, not all enemy units. So this does have a drawback, because it's damaging your own stuff. But on the other hand, it's creating the potential to have one big unit that's just slowly but surely battering down the enemy. But really, the big question with this is there going to be some synergy out there to like help this card do something? Because on the face of it, it's kind of a risky order to use. Could be really strong early game if you've got a decent high defense unit and you're playing against, say, for example, an aggro deck like Japan aggro that has a lot of 1 defense units because it's like a rolling board clear. But on the whole, it's not lighting the world on fire just yet. However, given what we've seen with synergy when it comes to these new kind of allied expansions, let's wait and see, shall we? Okay, so this is Romanian Bridgehead. This is another Polish order. This one is a 2-cost order. It is a special, for which, by the way, I am quite grateful, and you're about to see why. This order says, give target unit +2/+2 and blitz, destroy it in 2 turns. Those of you who are OTK builders, feel free to immediately start thinking about ways that you can make use of this, because you're going to. It's going to be done. Someone is going to find a way to play with some utterly crazy OTK decks with this, because this gives a card blitz and a bonus. Granted, it's only got 2 turns left to live, but it probably doesn't need them, because you're probably putting this on something that just obliterates the enemy's HQ, like a really big bomber. It's a really potent card, but I'm still, like, I'm going to sit here and say, we've previously seen Order Frontal Defense. Doesn't seem to be a lot of synergy between these 2 cards. They just seem to be 2 really good cards that are usable in specific circumstances. Is that the thing? Or is there more? But on the whole, yeah, it is kind of a really interesting piece of art. Hey, look, we've just got a transport truck, which is nice to see. But, yeah, we're going to see some people cook some crazy stuff with this card. Right. This is the 4TP. This is a 1-cost, 1-op cost, 2/3 tank. It's a standard card, and it says, destroy this unit after it attacks the enemy HQ. Okay, what does this card do? So, on the face of it, you might wonder. However, it's got 3 defense and 2 attack for 1k, so it had to have a drawback. And it's an interesting one, because this thing has the potential to trade very well, especially into aggro decks. It's a tool that could be really quite good in the right circumstances, but also kind of has this you can use it to trade and trade and trade and then pop it to try and do some damage to HQ, but you've got to pick your timing. Because obviously it's going to explode after it does, but in the meantime it's quite annoying to remove, and has the potential to trade well, which feels quite mid-rangey, which kind of sorta, by the way, doesn't feel like the previous two cards we've seen. Interesting, no? Anyway, we're going to have to dig a bit further for me to really be able to tell you much about this, because on the face of it, this is just another good value card that is situationally pretty funky and can be quite annoying, but it's not lighting the world on fire. Hello. This is the 24th Ułan. Ułan, I think, is the correct pronunciation, but if you're Polish, you're going to have to correct me because I'm not that good. I have Polish friends, but this is not a word I'm familiar with, at least not pronunciation-wise. However, what this is a standard 3-cost, 0-op cost, 3-5 Blitz Infantry. This thing has insane stats. It's Blitz Infantry, it's 3-5, and it has 0-op cost? This thing's terrifying. So what's the fix? Because there's got to be one. We've seen the theme, and there is. Kinda. The text is, destroy at the end of your turn unless a unit was destroyed this turn. As long as something, yours or your opponent's, blows up, this thing stays around. Now the 4TP starts to be much more interesting, because if you've got the 4TP or a couple of them kicking around and being annoying and difficult to trade out, and then suddenly you throw this into the front line, thank the Lord it's not a tank, which of course would make no sense, the Ułan, but anyway, this becomes a massive threat, because you can just trade out the 4TPs because they were going to die anyway. And this thing hangs around, allowing you to continually trade it really efficiently. So now we start to see a couple of cards that do seem to synergize with each other and lean Poland into a high trade value. Now that's interesting. Certainly it's a departure from the kind of previous main thoughts of Poland, which was legions and being very, very just buffing as it goes along. I can certainly see this getting some use and being tried out in a few decks, because the value on this card is very, very high. If you can just work round and play around the downside, and that's really interesting because it makes you think, and as I said, I like thinking based cards, always make me happy. This thing's incredible value. 3-5 Blitz Infantry with 0-op cost for 3. It's really quite good. Right, this is the Danuta. It's an armoured train. We have seen armoured trains in cards before, as elites. This is a special. It is a 3-cost, 3-op cost, 3-4 tank with guard and heavy armour. And it says, at the start of your turn, add a 4 TP to your support line with Blitz. Destroy it at the end of turn. 4 TP obviously appearing down below. So this is armoured train stuff. We've seen the Soviet armoured train that continually drops light infantry. We're going to a very similar theme here. This thing is going to be hanging around, guarding your HQ, and dropping tanks that do come with a downside, but have very good stats for trading and being frustrating, and of course it gives them Blitz. Genuinely, it's a really interesting card. I will say it is important probably not to get trapped into the thought that this is somehow designed to go into a 3-op deck. It's not. The 3-op cost is just a downside for just the value that this thing can generate. But boy, could this thing generate some value. That said, its defense is not huge, so you can get rid of it, but then on the other hand, you can run 2 of them, which obviously you can't do with the big Soviet armoured train. I like this. I think it's really interesting. I'm not quite sure where it fits. I guess, again, it does fit this kind of more trade-heavy Poland-feeling deck, and we've definitely seen quite a few leans towards more mid-range classic-y stuff in this Allied expansion, particularly in France. but also a little bit in Finland and now in Poland. But anyway, I kind of like this. I think it's interesting. I love to see more armoured trains being kind of functionally used in the game, because I think they're a really interesting part of warfare. Yeah, I really want to keep an eye on this, because I want to see who comes up with the most interesting way to use this, because it could be quite literally a value train. Alright, yes, low-hanging fruit. Actually, possibly kind of slightly rotten on the ground, just picking it up fruit. But can't resist. Anyway, the Iron Division. 5 cost, 6/6 guard. 'Tis 1 op cost. It's a limited card, and it says at the start of your turn, draw a card. Destroy this unit after the 3rd time. So this thing hits the board with really good stats, guarding your HQ or whatever you want to cover with it, and then draws you 3 cards before it goes away, while doing whatever else you want to do with it. This is quite good. This is a very good value tool. It's a very cool value tool, I should say. I'm not quite sure how strong it's going to be as to where it's going to see use, but it definitely fits into a trade-heavy deck, which we have, of course, seen some support for. So, yeah, this could be really interesting. This could be a very strong card, and if it is, it will certainly be one that you want to answer when it hits the board, because draw is good, stats are good, and guards are good, and this has kind of got all of the above. Okay, Poland in United Front. Okay, so Poland's the weird one. It feels a little bit like the odd one out in some ways, because we have 2 cards, the 2 initial orders the 2 initial cards rather, that don't seem to be colossally fitting the thing, and then we see some cards that fit a specific focus. We do see some cards that fit a specific focus as being really about high value and trading, and just outvaluing your opponent with good stats, and the generation of other units. And then we've got an OTK tool, which just sort of sits out there doing its own thing. So, yeah, and then obviously we have an order that turns one of your units into a kind of constant ping damage to enemy units, and your own units, which is another thing to be aware of. And I suppose in theory that order could be used in synergy with the unit that needs something to die every turn to stay on the board, but it seems a very inefficient way to. I'm not sure. I think there are some cards here that will see play, and I think there are some cards here that won't. On the whole, being honest, I don't think Poland got the strongest landing from this. I think it is the least cohesive, to me, feeling set of cards, whereas the other nations felt incredibly cohesive. But it's enough of me babbling about Poland. You can get to listen to me babbling about the whole expansion next. Okay, so summary time. That's United Front. That's 24 cards for the Allied nations, and the way that they're going to play out, at least the way I think they're going to play out and be used in the game. And we have seen a big emphasis on synergy. We're seeing a very tight focus on what these cards are doing primarily. As I say, one of the Allied nations in Poland feels like it didn't quite get the same level of cohesive treatment, but it's still not terrible. These are some very interesting cards. Some of them are very strong, and I think we're going to see them fold into some interesting archetypes. I'm particularly excited to see some good value trading cards appearing, and I hope that that will help to shift the meta away from just credit acceleration being incredibly strong. Anyway, obviously for that to happen, we're going to have to see some tapering of said credit acceleration, and that's something that will be talked about when we talk about balance patches and changes like that, and rotations, both of which will also be around on this channel, because I'm going to cover everything for this. But that's been my coverage of the cards as a whole for United Front, and I think it's pretty cool. Overall, I'm quite excited by the expansion. Yes, I still have some reservations about the pre-order and being able to get them for money 6 days earlier, but the cards themselves are very interesting and I think are going to be pretty cool to play around with. I'm certainly looking forward to it. I hope you are. If you have opinions, thoughts, throw them in the comments, join my Discord, chat, reach out to me. It's always fun to talk to different people about it. As always, please do make sure to give me a like and follow. You can catch me on Twitch. All the stuff's down below. And as ever, please do think about supporting the channel if you're able. I always hate asking, but on the other hand, it is something that's just a truism of life of someone who streams and creates content online, is we kind of have to say to you guys, give us some support, because that's kind of the best way for us to keep doing what we're doing. Anyway, I hope it was useful, hope it was interesting. As always, take care of yourselves, be good humans, and I will catch you next time.